Rebbe, mir willen sich mit Kasches an CD. Rebbe.
7 years old and 51. He brought me to Yeshiva of Adelphia to Rabbi Hillel Weiss. And Weiss asked me on Kiyiten and Kiyutan. I knew absolutely nothing. I did not know the Gemara. My father answered all the questions. He said, they called me David. Do you know how to play ball? I said, yes. He said, that's very important. You can go to the first class Mesifta. That was the end of the Perche. It's documented that Rabbi Shlomo said, every kasha that a Talmud asks is the most important kasha in the world. Why? Because he's asking it, and he wants to know the answer. And they taught us, Yeshiva of Adelphia, Rav Birnbaum. They taught us that there's nothing greater, more delicious in the Torah, in the world, than the Torah. I saw a young man who's in the 9th grade. I don't see him now. I was telling him before, tomorrow, when we're going to come back, only one boy came from the class. There he is. There he is. Look at him. There he is. I told him tomorrow morning, we're going to learn so good. It's going to be so delicious, okay? And with that, the Eibishter should help us. Mati, right? Yes. That we should love the Torah.
I remember walking into the room and being electrified by the scene in front of me. This Chashuva Rosh Yeshiva was jumping up and down. No, he was jumping up and up, higher and higher, just to be pulled back down by gravity. His neshama was so great that it was soaring upwards. His pure love for every yid in the room could be felt. His love for the Torah could be felt. His love and joy was pulling everyone up with him. The longer you spent with him, the more you saw how much simcha there is in Yiddishkeit and how every yid is so special. This yid was Rabbi Dovid Trenk, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Mir Yeshiva, who for many years in the past was the beloved Mashgiach in Adelphia Yeshiva. Let us go down memory lane to bring this gadol to life, so that we too can strive to emulate the joyous Yiddishkeit of Harav Trenk. In 1913, Rav David's father, Reb Shia, arrived with his mother from Galicia, and in 1933, he married Batsheva, the daughter of Rav Tzvi Hersh and Golda David. The family grew to include 3 sons, Chaim Yitzchak, David, and Zevi, and 1 daughter, Leah. The atmosphere in the home was full of simchas hachayim, genuine happiness. Young Menachem Yechiel Dovid Trenk, or David as he was known, would be influenced by rabbeim, teachers, and older friends, but no one left more of an imprint on the boy than his father. Like the other boys in his family, David went to Eitz Chaim for elementary school. Much of his love for Yiddishkeit came from the weekly Shabbos Perche groups at which the older leaders spoke of the glory of yeshiva life. As a teenager, Reb David and many of his friends went to the Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yaakov Yosef on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Known as RJJ, it was one of the first real yeshivas established in New York City and was the same yeshiva that his father, Reb Shia, had attended for 2 years. A turning point in the life of Reb David came when he graduated high school and decided to join the Beis Medrash of the Mir Yeshiva in Flatbush. It became his yeshiva, the great men seated along the front wall having a lifetime impact on him. He would speak with reverence of the Rosh Yeshiva of Avram Kalmanovich and Rav Ephraim Mordechai Ginsburg, the Mashgiach Rav Hirsch Feldman, and the then Rosh Kollel Rav Shmuel Birnbaum. But the greatest impression of all was left by the man who would become his Rebbe Mufik, his prime influence, Rav Shmuel Brudny. Along with a perfectly clear and easily understood shir, Rav Shmuel conveyed something else to his Talmidim: kavod HaTorah, reverence for every word and idea of Torah. One day, a group of Bachrim in the Mir Yeshiva dining room were having a debate as to which living Jew had most impacted American youth. and various names were suggested, different Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbanim of the time. Dovid Trenk's answer was unique. Mike Tress, he said. Dovid was persistent in his view that the Agudas Yisrael leader, Rav Elimelech Gabriel, Mike Tress, Zechrayne Levracha, had been the critical figure in shaping the future of the American Torah world, since with his vision, heart, and dedication, Mr. Tress had succeeded in creating an aura around the European Gedolei Yisrael and their values. The Shabbos afternoon Perche groups, inspired by Mr. Tress, and the programs they spawned, had captivated young Dovid, who had been an eager participant in every get-together. When Mike Tress spoke about Gedolim, Dovid felt himself overwhelmed by the reverence of the speaker. Reb Dovid continued, what Mike Tress did with Aguda, Reb Josh Silbermintz, the founder of Perche, did with Perche. It was the little brother of Agudas Yisrael. They both understood that even if the adults were committed and inspired, there would be no lasting impact without the children. So they joined forces to give us children the ideals of Aguda, to teach us about the greatness of Torah and the Gedolei Yisrael. For 2 hours a week, the heroes were not baseball players, Yogi Berra or Joe DiMaggio, but lahavdil, Rav Chaim Oizer, the Chafetz Chaim, and the Gera Rebbe. The older Perche leaders spoke about Gedolim, most of which was still living in Europe, and invested their young charges with a genuine longing to experience that sort of life. So, of course, when he was 23 years old and a shidduch suggestion came from Mr. Tress himself, Dovid was excited. And it wasn't just any shidduch. The girl's name was Leah Bagri, and her father's sister, her Aunt Hinda, was married to Mike Tress. It was a unique family. Torah and Achrayus was the motto in the whole Tress and Bagri mishpacha. It was a perfect fit for Dovid. And so, in Elul of 1964, they were married at the Riverside Plaza Hotel, with the Rav Yaakov Yitzchak Ruderman serving as Masada Kedushin. In the early 1950s, when Camp Munk was born, among the first campers was young Dovid Trenk. He would never leave. He started as a camper, then a counselor, and finally he returned as one of the camp's first married staff members. One morning, in the camp learning groups, a boy asked a kasha. That's the Marsha's kasha, his Rebbe Reb Dovid roared. The Heilige Marsha asks the question you just asked. Reb Dovid grabbed the boy and hoisted him up, carrying him on his shoulders, and running around the camp from learning group to learning group, telling the boy to repeat the question for each of them. That was decades ago. But that boy, now a Zayda, still feels the rush of warmth whenever he recalls that day. Another morning, Rabbi Trenk realized that the boys weren't into their learning. Suddenly, he started shouting, "Up, up, everybody up, let's go on the benches." He jumped up onto a bench and told the boys to do the same. Then he called out, "What are we doing, boys? Aryeh, what are we doing? David, what are we doing? Shmuley, what are we doing?" "Learning," one called out, and the others said, "Yes, we are learning Gemara." "We are learning Hashem's Torah," he roared back. "Do you know what that means and how lucky we are to be able to be learning Hashem's Torah? Us, to be able to learn Torah's Hashem?" And still standing on the benches, the learning came alive with the sweet voices of the boys together with the roar of their Rebbe. Back in the Mir Yeshiva, the Menal, Rabbi Yosef Klein, saw that some boys were being pulled by the Goyish culture outside the yeshiva. He created a new class and thought that Rabbi Trenk had what it took to lead this class. He went to discuss his idea with Rav Avraham Kalmanovich, the Rosh Yeshiva, who agreed. The class didn't have a formal name, so the boys named their little group RTBS, Rabbi Trenk's Boys. From the outset, the experience was different than in any other classroom. Rabbi Trenk would bring the boys to his apartment. Aware of the fact that not all of them came from warm homes, he wanted them exposed to the warmth and security of a vibrant Jewish home. A Talmud from that era remembers walking into the Rebbe's home, the apartment on Day Hill Road, and seeing Mrs. Trenk playing piano, an infant boy on her lap tapping the keys contentedly. The sight, a functional, happy, normal home, made a bigger impression on him than anything Rebbe said in Shir. Years later, he understood that this was Rebbe's point. In a letter written after Rabbi Trenk's Petira, A Talmud from that era recalled, "I heard about this amazing Rebbe, Rabbi Trenk, and I wanted to switch to his shir. Walking into his shir was like walking into Disney World. His energy, his enthusiasm, his sheer delight in teaching Torah was amazing. While teaching Gemara, he would zoom through the aisles, jump in the air, land right in front of me and shout, 'Yitzchak, do you taste it?' He gave over a geschmack for learning that I never experienced before or after. Oh, how much I learned from him. He opened up a spigot and turned it on, full blast. Coming to yeshiva immediately changed from being a drag to being a delight, all because of Rabbi Trenk. In 1970, a group of Lakewood Askanim decided to open a new yeshiva in the midst of the small, well-kept farmhouses of Adelphia, New Jersey. Even in 1970, Lakewood was the hub of the American Torah world, so a yeshiva located in the nearby town would benefit from being close to the Talmidei Chachamim of Lakewood. And in time, the yeshiva staff would be able to send their children to the Lakewood schools. Rabbi Yerucham Shein, a dynamic young Talmid Chacham, was selected to lead the new yeshiva, and he set out to assemble a staff starting with Rosh Yeshiva. He was fortunate enough to persuade two of the most respected Avrechim in Lakewood, Rav Chaim Epstein Zechrein Levracha and Yibadel Ben Chaim, Rav Meir Hershkowitz Shlita, to say the higher shiurim. Once these two revered Talmidei Chachamim joined, Chasheva young men lined up to apply for the new yeshiva. Once the Beis HaMedrash was set, Rabbi Yerucham got to work on building his high school. On a swelteringly hot day in the summer of 1972, he drove up to Camp Munk to offer the Menal position to Rabbi Dovid Trenk. The Yeshiva in Adelphia evolved into a unique place. The yeshiva was unlike any other yeshiva in the history of the American Torah world. Outstanding masmidim and lamdonim, Bachrim immersed in the shiurim of the illustrious Rosh Yeshiva, learned alongside those who needed a more personal touch than the other mainstream yeshivas offered. We went there, one Talmud of that era jokes, because if you spoke quickly and mumbled a bit, you could say you learned in Adelphia and people would think you said Philadelphia. The Talmidim may have been diverse in background, in level of learning, and in personality, but Rav David's lifelong friend, Willie Rosenfeld, noticed that every Adelphia Talmid that I ever met had one thing in common. They were all mini Trenks, talking like him, moving like him, making other people feel good, showing respect and warmth. On Rosh Hashanah, during Rabbi Trenk's last years, when he was already a Rosh Yeshiva in Lakewood, he spoke in his yeshiva before Tkiyas Shofar, discussing Akedas Yitzchak, which had been in that day's Kriyas HaTorah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram Avinu to sacrifice his son, and Avram asks, which son? Hashem says, the son that you love. And Avram Avinu says that he loves them both. Come on, Rabbi Trenk said, let's be honest. Here Avram Avinu has one son who's mamish a tzaddik, he's never done an aveira, and he has the other son who is a peradam, wild and disobedient. Is it possible that a tzaddik like Avram didn't know which son he loved more? The answer, Rav David banged on his stender, the answer is that he loved them both equally. He saw the good side of Yishmael just as he saw the good side of Yitzchak. He saw the potential in Yishmael just as he did in Yitzchak. He loved both sons. It was quiet in the room. And then Rav David concluded, and that's why Rashi tells us at the end of the Parsha that we see that Yishmael did tshuva. Of course he did tshuva. His father loved him, and his father believed in him. He had where to come back to. From the outset, Rav David had his own brand of teaching, finding ways to lift words off a page, to grab hold of complex concepts and make them simple. Rashi, he would enthusiastically say, jumping up and down as he said it, Rashi is our best friend, our very best friend. A Talmud in his 50s recalls how, until today, every time he leans over his Gemara to read a Rashi, he feels a flood of warmth as he encounters his best friend. In 2008, Rabbi Trenk decided to move to Lakewood, where he founded Yeshiva Meireshes Yeshua. This would be the crowning glory of his Arbatzas HaTorah. Rabbi Trenk tried to conceal his lofty levels. At times he succeeded, but when it came to tefillah, it was impossible for him to hide it. Talmidim would come back to yeshiva over the Yomim Noirayim period simply to experience davening with their Rebbe. His children knew that he rarely missed minyan, and when pressed by family members to recall a time he davened alone, he couldn't come up with a single example. His Talmidim knew the truth. Their Rebbe was a tzaddik. He worked hard to conceal it, but sometimes the light was simply too bright. Purim was one of those times. He drank, and secrets emerged. The secrets he kept hidden all year long. How much Torah he knew, and how deeply he knew it. How connected he was to Hashem. How much he truly knew about each of his Talmidim and understood their neshamas. A Rebbe in Yeshiva, Mir Yeshiva, once went to discuss an issue with the Lakewood Mashgiach, Rav Matisyahu Solomon Shlita. When he mentioned the name of Rabbi Dovid Trenk, the Mashgiach whispered, Alamed Vovnik. Reb Dovid is Alamed Vovnik. Over the summer of 2018, he wasn't feeling well, and at the beginning of the fall, he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. As he grew weaker, close friends suggested that the Rebbitzin close the door to visitors in order to protect their husband's dignity. The Talmidim feel like he belongs to them just as to me, Rebbitzin Trenk said, and they're probably correct. So what right do I have to tell them that they can't be here? When Perche decided to dedicate the Siyum Hamishnayos in memory of Rav Trenk, we approached Mrs. Trenk for permission. You have to ask my permission, she said. My husband didn't belong to me. He belonged to Klal Yisrael. It would be an honor for him. One summer day, seated on the grassy Camp Munk lawn, Rabbi Trenk called out, Rav Matisyahu Solomon wasn't feeling well today. And the Mashgiach, the Heilige Mashgiach, told the person who called for advice that they should instead ask someone else. Who was that person? Mrs. Leah Trenk. That's who the Heilige Mashgiach said to go to. Along with taking pride in his Rebbitzin, he also wanted people to understand that expressing pride in one's wife was the job of a husband. His Talmidim all say that they all set out to build their homes with the view of the Trenk's home in their minds. His last words in this world were to her. He turned to face his wife, laboring with every word as he looked up and asked, Are you all right? Do you have what you need? A final expression of care and appreciation for his partner and best friend. As his condition worsened, Klal Yisrael poured out their hearts to Hashem, asking for a refuah shalema for this great gadol. On Sunday, the 27th of Sivan, Tafshin Ayin Tes, June 30th, 2019, Rav Menachem Yechiel Dovid Trenk returned his heilige neshama to Shamayim. The fountain of chiyus, of life, of joy, and of impacting others was stilled. The Levaya was held at Kahal Zichron Yaakov, Rabbi Gissinger's shul in Lakewood. The shul was jammed to capacity, the many worlds of Rav Dovid Trenk overlapping in the room and the adjacent parking lot. The room was a symphony of all kinds of Yidden, with the front row made up of Gedolei Torah and Talmidei Chachamim. Rabbanim, Roshei Yeshiva, and family members were maspid. And then Reb Dovid's younger brother, Reb Zevi, got up. He spoke, then suddenly stopped, and instead he sang. In front of the Aron HaKodesh, he started a popular niggun to which his brother, Reb Dovid, had added words, Torah in Adelphia, with which he would cheer on his beloved Talmidim. In the middle of the Levaya, Reb Zevi sang that song, Torah in Adelphia. Sending a ripple of longing and love and gratitude through the room. The people smiled, because for a moment, it was as if Reb Dovid had come back, and then the pain returned, even more intensely than before. Later, after the Levaya, Mrs. Trenk would tell her brother-in-law, Thank you for bringing the spirit of Rav Dovid to the Levaya. A huge crowd accompanied Rav Dovid to his resting place near his parents in the Mount Lebanon Cemetery in Woodbridge, New Jersey. Kinderlach, Rav Dovid Trenk Zatzal taught everyone how to love Hashem, His Torah, and every single Yid. Let us all become His Talmidim and live every single day with simcha for our Yiddishkeit and love for Hashem, His Torah, and every single Yid. That will truly bring him an Aliyas Neshama. Yehi Zichroi Baruch.